Here is a video about reducing emissions in order to fight climate change, but the video will make the argument that reducing emissions is futile. So it's just a one-page piece that I wrote, and I will upload it. For those of you in my 1A class who are watching this, I will include it under files on Canvas, but anyone's welcome to watch this video. So I'm just going to read it to you. I'll share it on the screen and read it to you, but 3 times as I read, I will break in and I'll include a graphic to illustrate the data. So first, let us share the actual argument, and here it is. So now I can't even read it because it is, there it is. Even if we could magically eliminate all emissions starting immediately, gases already in the atmosphere will continue to warm the globe for at least another 50 years. That's a point that doesn't get made often enough, that what's up there doesn't just stop. It keeps on warming things for at least another 50 years, but I'm going to go with 50 because I'm trying to be generous in this video. And then after that, those gases disperse. It takes an additional 50 years to cool. Thus, it will take 100 years from now to cool back to normal, or to now. And this is if we could magically eliminate all emissions forever. But sadly, far from being magically eliminated, global emissions continue to rise about 1% annually. The only exception was 2020 because of COVID lockdowns. And here we're going to pause this screen share, and instead we're going to include this one here. Can we make it bigger? Yes, we can. So as you can see from this one, annual CO2 emissions are rising and rising and rising again. And except for that little dip there, 2020 during those lockdowns, they're higher than that and higher than they were in 2019. And it goes up about 1% a year here. So this is data you can double check if you feel like it. This is from 2023 here. Okay, how can I? Let's then go back to this one here. Okay. Now, what about the United States? Isn't it our fault? Well, US carbon emissions peaked around 2006. That was the most that we ever produced, and have been gradually declining since 2007. Why? What's the main reason for the decline? It's the US transitioned away from coal and toward natural gas. Natural gas has been our largest source of power for everything, electricity, whatever we want to generate, heating, cooling, since around 2015. Natural gas is a fossil fuel, but it is about 40% less polluting than coal. So even then, the US still has a disproportionate responsibility for global emissions. As of 2023, which is the most recent data, the US emits approximately 15% of the world's total emissions. But because we've been emitting less and other countries are emitting more, the US's percentage slightly declines each year as other countries' emissions are rising. So in a few years, it'll be like 14% and then 13% and so on. For comparison, in 2023, China emits 28% of the world's emissions. Europe, in total, all the countries of Europe emit 15%. India emits 7%. Both Chinese and Indian emissions have been rising annually since around 2002. Of course, China and India are both about 4 times the size of the US. And so eventually, if they're as industrialized as the US, it'll be even more emissions. Let us go to another graphic, which is here. This I thought was very helpful. So let us do that. And there you can see it. Hopefully you're looking at this. So this is emissions, and you can see the percentage of responsibility from the countries. And I think this is just a nice little bit of history here. I won't keep it up too long. You can always freeze frame it. You can freeze this video. But since Europe was the first industrialized continent, European countries, Europe used to have 100%. All the emissions in the whole world used to come from Europe back to like, up to like 1800. The United States, before we started transitioning away from coal, was the big polluter through like the 50s. And as you can see, the United States responsibility keeps shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, whereas China, appropriately it's red, China keeps growing and growing and growing. So you can see here, even if we could make the United States vanish, it's only going to eliminate 15% or even less of the world's emissions. Okay, let's go back to the argument. And here we go. Should Americans still try to reduce emissions? Perhaps, but it will be futile. So if you haven't figured it out by now, it's going to be futile. And here's a main example. I'm making this in 2024, and here is the thing that we're hearing about a lot in the United States as I make this video. American politicians are forcing American automobile companies to sell electric vehicles. The idea is that electric vehicles have fewer emissions, but electric vehicles emit only about 33% fewer emissions, so 1/3 less than combustion vehicles. And even then, American consumer vehicles only account for about 17% of US emissions, which would mean that it's 3% of global emissions. So if every American car and every American truck suddenly vanished forever, not even EV, but vanished, it only eliminates 3% of the globe. But if we magically went electric, it would only remove 1% of global emissions, or actually even less, because of the percentage of other countries is rising. And how do we know that EV vehicles emit only 1/3 less? Here is another chart for you. This is the last one. And this comes from the Rivian Polestar or Polestar Rivian Pathway report, which came out in 2023. Those are two electric vehicle companies. So if anything, they are biased in favor of electric vehicles. It's in their interest to say how good it is, but actually, if combustion vehicles emit 55 carbon units per vehicle, electric vehicles still emit 39 carbon units per vehicle. This is for the total life of the vehicle. One reason is that we have to generate the electricity to power the vehicle. So when you're generating the electricity, that makes emissions, even if the vehicle itself doesn't emit it. So as you can see, there's no tailpipe emissions, but the emissions come from the power plants. So here, actually, according to their calculations, it's 29% less than combustion. I'm trying to be generous in this video. I don't want to exaggerate my argument. I'm really trying to be conservative with the argument. And so I'm making it 33% less to try to give credit to electric vehicles. Well, that pretty much makes the argument, I think. So let's just conclude it here. So therefore, there's really not much we can do with reducing emissions. Let's stop fooling ourselves by trying to reduce emissions. I find it to be feel-goodism, and I think that we are distracting ourselves from doing other things that might work, such as, if we really want to cool the planet, we'll have to start geoengineering. That's my claim of policy here at the end of the argument. And geoengineering, so if you're taking my 1A class, you know what that is. If you're watching this video by yourself, then you can look it up if you don't know. Solar radiation modification, or SRM, is the most promising as I make this video in 2024. And essentially the argument is we'll have to experiment with that if we really do want to cool the planet, which I hope that we do. And here's my sources here at the bottom, my main sources I thought I should list. That concludes our video about why cutting emissions is futile, but we could do something else, I hope, instead.